Very nice sanctuary inside. During those next few years, we were able to grow to about 100 people. And during that time, I really liked the idea of not having a mortgage. We had started 9 other churches, and I didn't really like mortgages very well at all. And so I thought, well, this is great. And I thought, well, I think we'll just go on like this for a while. So I had one of my plans. I should know better than having plans, but I had a plan. And I looked around that plaza. There was all kinds of empty stores. We only had 1 year left on our lease. So I went to the leasing agent. We were paying only $1,500, which was a good, very good rent at that time. And so I thought, well, this is great. It's comfortable. We don't have to worry about the money. And so I went to them with this big plan. I thought they're going to let us have more space so we can expand our Sunday school. And on top of that, we won't have to pay a whole lot because they're empty. They need people to rent this place. So this was a year before our lease was up. When I went in and submitted my plan and asked them what it would cost us to rent more space, they explained to me that the space we already had was $1,500, but next year it's going to go up to $3,500. $3,500. And I thought, oh my. And that's when the Lord pushed us out of the nest. And he said, I got something else for you. So we started looking. We wanted to stay within a couple miles or so of that location. And so we put Tampa Road as our upper space. That was as far north as we wanted to go from where we were. And we started looking. A fellow in our church had an aerial photography business. And he saw from one of the pictures he had taken, he saw 4 acres of land. This 2 acres that the church is on and the 2 acres next door. And so we started looking at them and trying to figure out what we were going to get. Well, we decided on this 2 acres. Now, you know why we decided on this 2 acres? Because the guy that owned this 2 acres would sell it to us for $160,000. The guy on those 2 acres wanted $180,000. So we decided these 2 were the ones the Lord had for us. Immediately, we started talking to the fellow about the other 2 acres. And we wanted to get it. There was a guy in Bowling Green, Kentucky that owned it, a Baptist guy. And I don't know if he was a good Baptist. I'll explain that. But at any rate, he let us use it. We kept it mowed, and we used it for extra parking during those days so we could have parking near the church. We started trying to build late 1997. And in January of 1998, we actually started footers. I would come up here every day to see if the footers were still here. It was a very exciting time. And so we started the footers in January of 1998. We had to be out of the leased building by the end of April. And any of you that have lived around Pinellas County, you know that things don't move real fast when you're trying to get permits and all of that sort of thing. I remember the permit for the little shed took a long time, 8 or 10 months. And anyhow, we started building the building. And God blessed, we had a group called New Testament Church Planters that came in for at least a couple months and helped us on the building. And the Lord blessed. And by the end of April, the first building, the one up in front, that building was all finished. We had the carpet down, we had the pews in, and we had to be in here by May 1st. The only problem was the county wouldn't let us use that yet. It was all ready, but they wouldn't hook the electric or anything like that that first Sunday of May. So we didn't know exactly what we were going to do. And then I thought, well, they said we can't meet in the building, but they didn't say we couldn't meet outside the building. And so we plugged our organ in. I don't know what we plugged it into, but we did have it. No, we must have moved the piano in there. But at any rate, we put it in the hallway back here. And any of you that have been here a while, you might remember Karen Link, formerly Karen Foster. She came to our church the second Sunday we were in existence. The Lord gave us a piano player. And so we put her there in the hallway. She played the piano, and we opened the double doors going out to the portico, and we all met under the portico. So we had our first service out under the portico. The next weekend was going to be Mother's Day, and we wanted to have the service over in what was our fellowship hall then. And we didn't think there was any way it was going to happen. Saturday came, the day of the ladies' meeting, and we still had no electricity. And I think it was about 10 or 11 o'clock that morning, they came in and turned on our electric. And so we were able to start using the building at that point. The Lord blessed in a great way. It was also during those years that we saw an article in the Sunday newspaper that a deaf community near us. And I was reading all of those accounts of the different deaf people, and it really touched my heart. And the Lord had already blessed us. We had Jerry and Janice Willoughby who signed. We had the Elliots already in our church, and she signed. And I thought, wow, we should be able to do something. So that next Saturday, we went out door to door in that deaf community. I believe the first Sunday, 8 people came, if I remember correctly. I think maybe the next week, 12 people. It wasn't very long before we had a sign language class and taught some of the folks in our church sign language. And I know that Joe and Patty were in that first class, and now they're signing all the time. I was in that class too, but I didn't do as well as Joe. I got through the thing where I had to sign my testimony. Now, I worked on messages my whole life, but working on a testimony in sign language, that scared me to death. And I spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure out how I was going to do that. I got through and gave that testimony. Now this morning, I told them all good morning. I remember that much, okay? So at any rate, the Lord allowed us to start that deaf ministry. And I really can't say, but I think through the years, we've probably seen at least 40 or 50 deaf people that I know back in those early years that came to know Christ as Savior. I remember having the funeral for one of our deaf men down in Miami, Florida. And what a great blessing to know that these folks knew the Lord. They heard the gospel even without ears, didn't they? And so what a blessing that was. So in 1998, we began to see God bless. And because we finally had our own building, people started noticing. In fact, I see Dexter and Bertha sitting back there, and I believe Dexter told me, he didn't live too far from here, and he told me he was coming by one day and he saw a bunch of people out working on the building, and that kind of impressed him that people were working on the building. I believe that may be how they came the first time, but they became very, very faithful, and he became one of our deacons here in the church and served the Lord very, very faithfully. But the Lord blessed the work, and we started growing. And we got to the point that we just kind of outgrew what we had. The auditorium over here was, I guess we could maybe seat 150 or 175 somewhat comfortably. And we were getting to the point that we were running above that sometimes. We eventually started a separate service at that time for our deaf people back in the other corner of the building. We had another service going on for our young people for a while. And we just did what we could do to get through those times. And then in 2004, we had seen more growth. And in fact, I remember advertising in the paper. I said, still preaching the old-time gospel, still singing the old-time hymns. Welcome back to the Old Country Church. The first month after we put that ad in the paper, we had 19 families visit our church. Can you imagine? In fact, the Heffernans were one of those families. They started coming, and when we started talking about building this, Brother Heffernan had just retired from construction. You know, isn't it amazing how the Lord puts all the pieces together? And so he oversaw the whole building process here. Many other people helped him, but he would work here all day long. And then he'd go home and order what needed to be done for the next part of the building. And, the Lord just put all the pieces together. Kind of reminds me of when Nehemiah went back and he wanted to see the walls built and how God put all the people together that needed to do what needed to be done. And that's what the church is really all about. So at any rate, we saw God continue to bless. We had our very first service in this auditorium on April the 1st, 2005. Now again, we had kind of the same situation we had over there. We didn't have electricity yet, but we did have electricity back there. So we got some long extension cords, And we got some lights in here temporarily. We opened the windows so there was a little bit of air. April's not too bad here sometimes. And so we did all of that, and our sound man hooked up the sound booth back there. So we had our very first service in here on April the 1st, 2005. And God just continued to bless. Through the years, God allowed us to have several staff members. And back around 2006, I guess it was, I started praying that God would show us what His plan was for the future of the church. I knew that I was getting a little bit older and that the day was coming when I would need to step out and let someone else take the reins of this ministry. And so around 2006, I started praying about that. 2007, I believe it was, the very end of the year, the church had grown to the point they told me I could go on a missions trip. Now, I'd never been on a missions trip other than going to the Philippines as a missionary. And so we went, they said, you can go wherever you want on a missions trip. Well, we wanted to go to the Philippines. It had been 31 years since we left the Philippines. And in those days, communication pretty well broke off. There was just no way to communicate. So we didn't know a whole lot about the works. We knew there were the 3 churches we had started. So in 2008, in January, we made a trip back to the Philippines. My wife and I and our oldest daughter went with us on that first trip. And it was such a blessing, I couldn't even begin to tell you. But at that time, I believe that in my heart, Heartbeat International Missions was born. I didn't know exactly what that was all going to be about, but God touched my heart about it. In 2010, while we were still here, God allowed us to charter that ministry. By that time, we knew where we would be living in retirement years. Our kids all lived up in Elizabethton, Tennessee, a little town not far from Bristol. And the important part was our 9 grandkids they lived there. And so my wife knew that was God's perfect will for our lives. And so we moved to Elizabethton, Tennessee. But in 2010, we chartered the ministry up there. We were able to buy a house up there, foreclosure. We started working on it, and our son that lives up there, he did a lot to work when I wasn't up there. And then I'd fly up sometimes after our Sunday service on those cheap flights on Allegiant, and I could fly up on Sunday and fly back on Thursday. So I only missed Wednesday night. And so I flew up and worked on the house, usually about 50 hours between Sunday night and Thursday afternoon. We got it ready. We were able to move up there in 2011. But I'll back up just a little bit. In 2010, we still didn't know exactly who God was going to bring in here. And I've never left a church until God allowed me to give him another shepherd. And so we prayed about it. We'd had several staff members, and every time I thought, maybe this is the one, they'd move off somewhere else. So finally, in 2010, I've been praying. I just still didn't know what God was going to do. I don't know what time it is either. Okay, I'm still doing okay. I'm clear up to 2010. Okay, but 2010, a friend of mine who was a missionary, who was in our church quite often, Brother Tony Ledbetter, he was one of those that knew what our plans were, and he'd been praying with us about it. And one day he called me and he says, I know of a fella. He said, I don't know him very well, but my pastor up in Indiana, he's a good friend of this guy named Jason Wiley. And he said, Jason Wiley is in Johnson City, Tennessee. And so I began to pray about it. And it was also during that time my dad passed away, so we were even more anxious to be able to get up there and to help my mother through that time. And I remember meeting Brother Wiley one time when I went up to take my father to a specialist. And I went up to the exit I get off of 26 to go to Elizabethton is exit 24. And when I figured out where Pastor Wiley was, I still had to get off exit 24. It was just the other direction a few miles. And so there he was, just a few miles from where we were going to be living. And I believe that first day we talked 4 hours. We're both pretty good at that. And we talked for about 4 hours. And then in June of that year, I believe on June the 10th, is that your daughter's birthday? Okay, June the 10th, a few days after his birthday, they came down here. And we had the house over here on Blue Turn Road, and so we got it ready so they could stay with their family over there during their time here. And they came, and we presented this to the church, and the church voted to have him and his family come here. So in September of that year, Brother Wiley joined us. Now, that's when I first realized that he was indeed crazy. Okay? I mean, now, I asked him to come here and work with me for 6 or 8 months, and then I was going to leave, and he'd become the pastor. He'd come in, work with me as my co-pastor at that time, but he would then become the pastor. Well, you know, old pastors say that all the time, and then they never leave. And so, I mean, someone would have to be crazy to have already been pastoring for many years and then to accept the fact of coming and working with an old pastor that might never leave. But he came. He came in September, and at the end of March that year, we left this area, moved on up to Elizabethton, Tennessee, and the Lord is blessed in a great, great way. Up there, we started the ministry of Heartbeat International Missions, and we actually had, I guess, informally started it while we were here, but we had a lot of missionaries to the Philippines, and so when we got up there, we started making missions trips and taking others with us. Many folks got burdened about the ministries of the Filipino pastors, and many of them started helping these pastors within their local churches. And so we saw the ministry grow. And then a couple of years later, the fellow that had kind of been my right-hand man in the Philippines, Pastor Emil Ofrecio, he asked me if I would be willing to handle his support. Now, I'd never thought about that part of it. I was just going to make trips and take people over. But I said, well, I'll check into it. I said, I have to see what the legalities are, what we'd have to do. Checked into it. It was all okay. And so we were able to start handling his support, I think around 2012 or 13. That was one pastor. Today, we have approximately 70 pastors that we send support to monthly. And then those 70 pastors, many of them have many different mission works that they've started through the years. In fact, Brother Ofrecio, the one I just mentioned, he now has 20 mission works around the Philippines. One of our others, who's a Filipino, is now over in Cambodia. He's our director over in Cambodia. We have probably at least 3 or 4 pastors over there now who are starting churches and starting mission works. Right now, we believe we have probably about 150 or more mission works, plus the 70. And when it all started out, I had no idea that that's what God planned to do with it. But folks, I want to tell you, I know some folks were a little upset with me when we left here, but I believe that it was God's will. And as I look back on it now, there's no way that I could think it was not God's will. Last year, 2021, when we moved up, my wife and I talked, and I said, we're not going to have much income, but I want to do this ministry without taking any income. I don't want it to be our retirement income. I want it to be our retirement ministry. And so we prayed about that, and the Lord is taking care of us. I still eat too much, no problems at all with that. The Lord's taking very, very good care of us. But last year in 2021, we have to file a yearly report to the IRS, though we're not responsible to them. It's just for information. Last year, when we filed the report of what money came into Heartbeat International Missions, it was over $1 million. Now, folks, that's because you as a church were willing to send us out. And you were willing to realize, even if it was reluctantly then, that we felt that was God's will for our lives. And what a blessing it is now to see what God is doing all over the Philippines, into some other Asian countries. Right now, one of our Filipino pastors is in Africa. Right now, he's there starting a church in Africa and trying to start a Bible Institute. Probably at least 4 or 5 of our pastors in the Philippines have started Bible Institutes. One of our pastors in Cambodia has started a Bible Institute. So young men are being trained for the ministry all over Asia, and it's because of a ministry that was started out of this church. I just want you to know that God is doing great, great things through your church. Every time we come back, we see so many new faces, and what a blessing that is to see what God continues to do in this ministry. And we thank God for Pastor Wiley and his family. I believe God brought in exactly the family he wanted to be here. When my wife and I left, it was hard for us. In fact, I want to introduce my wife. I'm going to have her stand. She doesn't like to stand, but so look fast, okay? That's my wife, Bonnie, and she has certainly been a tremendous help everywhere we've been. In starting churches, you can't just move into a town, not know anyone, and have something happen all alone. But my wife has always been by my side serving, and the Lord has blessed our ministries in such a great way. And every time we've had to do anything, folks, it's always been a difficult thing, many times financially. Many times financial difficulties. In fact, when we came into this first building, I did want to share that with you. I told you our lease was going to go up to $3,500 a month for the same 5,000 square feet we had. When we moved in here and got everything done, our mortgage payment was $390-some, I believe. So the Lord saved us about $10 by coming into our own building. And so I'm very, very glad that we took that step of faith. But during those years, there were a lot of difficult times. I remember times when between our mortgage, especially after we built this building, we also had some financial notes out that we were putting money into a sinking fund. And sometimes I thought that was going to sink. But nonetheless, we had times when our mortgage payments, if we counted all that together, were nearly $9,000 a month. And it was sometimes overwhelming, but I had seen God over and over and over again show what he could do. He didn't take us there all of a sudden. The first church we started was in Elmira, New York. And I remember when we bought an old church building there, I thought, I don't know how in the world we're going to pay this mortgage. We were going to have a 20-year loan, and it was going to cost us $106.30 a month. And I thought, how are we going to pay that? But the Lord allowed us to pay the $106, and then he took us on up to a little bit more until up here it was $9,000. But what a blessing. What a blessing to see what the Lord has allowed this church to accomplish, the souls that have been saved, the lives that have been changed, and what he continues to do. And don't give up on the property next door. Okay, I remember when we were just a small church, after we'd moved in here, we went over on that property, we all joined hands, we had prayer, we asked the Lord to give us that property, and I believe still he's able to do that. So just pray. Basically, from what I can see, this church needs a parking lot, and they need maybe a little bit more space, and there's a little bit of both over there. So we thank the Lord for that, but thank the Lord so much for what he's done. I thank you for your support. I thank you for what you've done. Even during the years we've been up in Tennessee, we could not carry on the ministry we have up there if it were not for your help. And I appreciate so much what you're doing. And again, I appreciate Brother Wiley and his wife. We went over there last night for pizza, and the best part was the brownies and ice cream and the chocolate afterwards. And Angie remembered how much I like dessert and how much I like chocolate. And fellas, please don't get jealous, but she gave me the biggest brownie. And she gave me this big dip of ice cream, and then she dumped chocolate syrup all over it. I was definitely on a sugar high when I left, but I thank the Lord for these folks. Thank the Lord for their faithfulness, and I thank you for your prayers.
Well, we thank the Lord for the vision that God gave Pastor Johnson and the faith to be able to press on and start this church and start this work. In the transition, is that 2010 time when we came, he said, let's co-pastor. And I said, no, I don't believe in that. I said, I think anything with two heads is a freak. And I said, you lead, I'll come in behind, and when it's time, I'll step in. And He had planned initially, we came in September, planned in December to do some voting going into the new year. And I got here, and very shortly after that, he decided he would start writing. He wrote a book on church planning, and he stepped back and said, the pulpit's yours for the entire month of October. And so I got done preaching I preached a 5-week series on the harvest in that year. And we got done, and he said, we're going to move the vote up to November. And the Lord just was in every piece of that as we worked together. Bonnie was Pastor Johnson's secretary, and I got to witness firsthand the Johnsons in action. In those days, the secretary, she sat where Pastor Evan sat, and she could look directly into Pastor Johnson's office. That door was open, and his desk was right there. And they had several discussions in the office. One day they were having my office was where Stu's office used to be, so I was in that, and I had like front row seats to everything that took place. And they were having a discussion one day, and Bonnie did not like some of the things that Pastor Johnson had to say, and so she got up and went around their desk and walked to Pastor Johnson's door and reached to the door and just closed it. And I think it was just sort of like, I don't want to look at you right now, and we're done having this discussion. And we just enjoyed just ministering with the Johnsons during that time and getting to know them and serving under them and serving with them during that time. We were in a transition ourselves, and just taking time to be able to come in and learn and get to know people here in the ministry. And we are very grateful for God's blessings these last 12 years as the Lord continues to do a work here in Palm Harbor. We're going to go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then we've got some special things. Glad to have Calvary Quartet with us. They're going to be singing here in the service to get things started. We've got about 15 minutes here, and you can go check on your crock pot and make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we love you and thank you for allowing us this morning to be able to hear a little bit about how you began, Lord, how you planted the seed for this work to begin. And God, we're so grateful, God, that not only the seed was planted, but that it germinated. And Lord, this church, Lord, exists as a result of the vision and, Lord, the faith of many people who came together to bring this place into existence. And Lord, we know that we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. And we are grateful for that. We do not discount it. And God, may we take that banner and, Lord, that baton, and may we lift it high and continue, Lord, to do things that honor and glorify you on into these next years as we serve and are servants in this generation. We love you, Father, and thank you for the opportunity we've had this morning. I pray that you'd bless the service which is to follow and the remainder of our day, for we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. You are dismissed.